Welcome back to LaunchPod. On November 28, 2019, Next Canada held a reception at Shopify HQ, welcoming our 80 finalists for Next 36, an accelerator program for aspiring entrepreneurs. Before they went into a grueling 2 days of interviews, we treated them to inspiring talks from some of Canada's top entrepreneurs. Today, we'll give you a behind-the-scenes glimpse with insights from a fireside chat between Joe Canavan, CEO here at Next Canada, and Jordan Banks, president at Rogers Media. Listen in as they talk about what it takes to scale companies and how to attract and retain talent in Canada.
It's so good to be here. I can't tell you how excited I am to be with my friend Jordan Banks. You've been out in front of some of the coolest trends in the world with eBay and with Facebook, and what you're doing now I think is going to be a massive transformation in what's happening in media. But let's go right back to the very essence of maybe, because we've heard Daniel talk a little bit about entrepreneurship and Jacqueline, how would you define entrepreneurship?
First of all, I thought Jacqueline was terrific. Like, I was so inspired. So
12 out of 10.
Yeah, 12 out of 10 is right. Well done. Really well done. You know, it was interesting to hear Daniel talk about entrepreneurship and his view and the way Shopify interfaces and helps entrepreneurs, and then to hear Jacqueline's experience, because I sort of think about entrepreneurialism a little differently. And it'd be interesting in the room to get a sense of whether or not people think like this. But the majority of people that I get to know and I talk to about their entrepreneurial journeys, they identify as an entrepreneur as a vocation. That's what they do. You're at a cocktail party and you say to somebody, "What do you do?" And they say, "I'm an entrepreneur," which I always didn't really get. I don't exactly know what that means. To me, being an entrepreneur is much more about the ethos, the essence of who you are. I like to build. I like to create. I like to have impact. I work hard. I'm judicious. I'm scrappy. Like, that's the essence to me of an entrepreneur. And whether you employ that ethos and those abilities and characteristics by starting your own business, or whether you decide, you know what, I'm much more comfortable being inside of another company employing those characteristics. One's an entrepreneur, one's an intrapreneur, but I think they have the exact same ethos. And so my message maybe to some of you is you know, we've grown up, and I look at this cohort, you've especially grown up with all these icons, the Zuckerbergs and the Bezoses and the Jack Dorseys of the world, and somehow they have been the definition of what it is to be an entrepreneur. And I think they are one instance, one set of entrepreneurs, but I think there are lots of other examples of entrepreneurs that are incredibly impactful, do amazing things, but don't necessarily have to start their own business and do that for the rest of their lives.
One of the things about you and other leaders that I know that really have driven a business forward, they embody character, integrity, resilience, and they know how to build a great team around them. Can you talk a little bit about your experience? Because I really, every time you and I are together and I hear you talk about what you've built and the culture and how much it matters to you, maybe you can share, because these folks are going to go out and build great companies. I would like them to understand how you see that.
Yeah, no, it would be my pleasure. And like Joe and some other folks in the audience, I've had the really good fortune over the last 20 years of being an angel investor in a lot of tech startups, and have also had the opportunity to mentor a lot of folks who are either in their first or second startup jobs. And if somebody was to ask me tonight, what are some of the common themes that I've seen across those businesses? And by the way, that's cross geographies, cross age of founders, cross industries. The common themes, two of them, and maybe the two most prominent ones, Joe, are as follows. One is they're way behind the curve when it comes to thinking about talent and mapping talent to the opportunity at hand. And then the second is they are too late in identifying people management as a critical discipline to scale. And so I think what you'll all experience, if you haven't already, on the second point is when you do an exit interview, when you lose somebody that you desperately don't want to lose, and you ask them why they're leaving, very rarely do they say, "I'm leaving for more money, more equity, a better title." Generally, in their most honest moment, what they say is, "I'm leaving because I didn't really have a people manager that had my back, inspired me, and was able to lead me to where I wanted to go." And so the quicker you can get ahead of that curve when starting a business or working in a business, ultimately the better off your people are going to be, and therefore the better off your business is going to be. And at the end of the day, no matter what business you're in today, you live in a knowledge economy. You could be in a manufacturing business, but you're only as good as the type of people and the quality of people that you can hire. And so then it begs the question, well, how do I make sure that I hire the best people that are the best cultural fit and can be most productive in my business? And I'm such a firm believer that you need to start with people who understand what it is you're trying to do, what needs to be true in order to get there, and are strong cultural fits. And what is a strong cultural fit? It's somebody that sees the world in a similar way that you do. And it doesn't mean that everybody needs to be like you. In fact, the exact opposite, right? Diversity of thought, skill set, gender, ethnicity is like hugely important. When you talk about the mission of the company and ways to align people towards that mission, everybody's got to be on the same page. Doesn't matter if you're 4 people or 400 people. And again, unfortunately, early on, you have so much stuff going on, you end up getting behind the curve on the things that are most important, like choosing the right people and like building a culture that is going to last.
Once you've built a great culture, do you find that these folks, it transcends a work relationship and they become a part of your life?
So I'm a huge believer, Joe, that like people that try to delineate between their professional life and their personal lives or have different personas, I'm this Jordan at work, but I'm this Jordan at home. Like, I think that doesn't work. I think it is super artificial. And the best work environments, when you talk to people who work in cultures they love and respect and want to flourish, what they'll say is they provided this company, this opportunity provides an opportunity for me to come and be my best self, my 360-degree self every day at work. And so what needs to be true in order for that to happen, right? I need a culture that is accepting of me, my differences, and my strengths, what I bring to the table. 2 is accepts and embraces diversity of thought. And 3 is I have a people manager that genuinely cares about me as a person, not me as an employee. Critical. If you looked at the top 10 businesses around the world today, measured by market cap, growth, quality of employees, I will guarantee you that they are all leaders in those respects.
You've touched on a couple other things about having a very clear vision, alignment to the vision. How important is being an effective communicator as a leader?
Yeah, so I think it's so critically important. One of the things when I, again, talk to a lot of younger people who are looking for first or second jobs, and here's what the conversation generally starts with. I ask them for, what is important to you in your search for your thing? And they'll say, well, listen, I'd like to make some money. I need a sort of a title that will give me some importance and influence. And I want to work for a brand that resonates and matters and has some profile. And I always say, like, and when I say, like, this isn't once or twice, these are common themes and occurrences. And I always say, like, those are 3 things that are totally irrelevant at your stage in life, absolutely irrelevant. The 3 things you should replace that with, they are as follows. One is, I'm going to work with a group of people that will care about me, that I can learn from. I have a manager that has my back and ultimately wants me to succeed as much as they want him or herself to succeed. And 3rd is, I go to work every day and I understand how every unit of my time and everything I focus on rolls up into 3 or 4 things that are most important to drive this business forward, right? The inextricable link between my time and effort and something that matters with impact. And the only way you know whether or not that's happening and whether you can roll that up is to have leaders who are very clear in what matters and how you measure success. And it sounds really simple, it's really hard, but when you have a leader that does that, it makes a world of difference. I think you'd agree. I mean, you are one of those leaders, right? Very clear in vision, very clear in what success looks like, and very clear in your vision on what steps need to be true in order to get.
And authenticity, right? I mean, that speaks to authenticity.
Yeah.
When I think about where you've positioned yourself, you've been out front early with eBay, you were out in front early with Jump, you were out in front early with Facebook. When you look at the world, and as these aspiring entrepreneurs are looking for what can they expect, where are the big growth trends in Canada or in the world in the next 5 years, 10 years? What are the 2 or 3 things that you see?
Well, let me start with one of the topics we've already covered, because I think it sort of starts and ends here, but I'll give you a few other thoughts. The war for talent is real, and it's not getting any easier. And it sounds cute and cliche-ish to talk about a war for talent, but it is brutal. And your businesses, whether you're an intrapreneur or an entrepreneur, will succeed or die based on your ability to win those wars. And so every single one of you needs to be asking the question, what is my unique selling proposition to get this brilliant 19-year-old University of Waterloo grad or student to work for me and not for Joe? And if you're not asking yourself that question, ultimately you're not going to build a very successful business. You don't have to reinvent wheels. There are a lot of people you can talk to about that. There's a lot of stuff you can read, but unless that is your number one thing of importance, you got a real big uphill battle. So I think that's one thing. This idea of not only attracting great talent, but also retaining that great talent for long periods of time. We can talk for a long time about that. I think the emergence of 5G is really interesting. We've heard a lot, I think, over the years about things that will fundamentally change everything. 5G is going to fundamentally change everything. And I'll just give you like 2 quick examples. One is if you think about the way you operate in your home or your condo or your cottage today, which is a pretty linear, one-dimensional experience where nothing really talks to anything. And yeah, you might connect to Sonos to play some music through some speakers, but like that would be sort of the definition of a connected home. Well, in 5 years' time, with the advent of 5G, everything will be connected and will be talking to each other. And so you will have to do very few things yourself that won't already be done through sensors and using AI. Think about a sports experience. So one of the things that I do at Rogers, I oversee a bunch of sports properties. Think about your experience at the Rogers Center, watching a baseball game, when everything is connected. When you are watching the game and on your phone, somebody just hit a home run, and by virtue of the sensors and the connectivity in the building itself, you can determine how far it went, how fast it went. You can replay it. You can share it with your friends. Holographically, you can experience what it was like to be the pitcher and see the ball leave the park. I mean, you can. There'll be an AR experience where you'll be able to like overlay on top of a player and know where he went to school, what his top 50 home runs look like, who he was traded for, who his favorite player was, what his kids look like. All of that's going to be enabled by 5G, right? All of it. And we're not talking about in a decade, right? 5G, if you go to Korea, right? 5G is there and has changed everything, and 5G is coming to Canada in the next 6 months in ways that we can't even imagine.
So like things like holographics.
Yeah.
A company in Toronto up near Sterling Hall. I was at the Canada Walk of Fame Gala last week, and they were giving an award to Dr. James Naismith, the inventor of basketball. And it was really incredible. They had a holographic image of him. They had an actor, of course, but it was a holographic of him speaking to a young phenom, somebody who's the next RJ Barrett or whoever you identify as being a rock star. So this 14-year-old kid who's at Crestwood talking
Elijah
to Dr.
Fisher.
Yeah, Elijah. Yeah. Nice. So
I got a 15-year-old son who loves basketball. Cheat sheet.
But it was incredible. And this is here in Toronto. But when I think about Canada, I really think that this is Canada's time. One of the reasons I'm excited to be here, one of the reasons I'm excited to be engaged and involved in this role is I think 10 years from now, when we look back on this era, we are going to see this as the golden era of innovation and entrepreneurship. I just see so many bright young people graduating out of our universities. The ideas that they're coming up with and hopefully deciding to commercialize on. And as Jacqueline was saying, maybe you veer, maybe you don't go to that old line, job, and you do believe in yourself. I mean, I really do think that that's the era that we're in. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's most exciting about Next is that I look out in the audience and very few people look like me. And if you think about one of the great defining characteristics of the best country in the world, which in my opinion is Canada, is we have an amazing cultural mosaic that is made up of a lot of first-generation Canadians who come here with an incredible work ethic, with a global perspective, right? No, they'll never talk to you about being the best fill in the blank in Canada where we have 37 million people, right? They'll talk about being the best fill in the blank around the globe, which has 7.5 billion people. They are incredibly industrious, incredibly judicious around the decisions they make, and they are driven to make a difference. And I sat on the board of University of Waterloo for a decade, and my greatest memories, my greatest experiences at Waterloo was getting inspired by the first generation Canadians at Waterloo who were here because they chose Canada or their parents chose Canada. And the fundamental thing that they were focused on doing was making an impact in this country on the global stage, which I love. And Next runs very parallel to that. If you think about the beauty of Next, like I raised a statue out here somewhere, called me 11 years ago and said, I have this crazy idea. I'm going to try to start this thing. Would you mind being a mentor? It was my pleasure. And that was a decade ago. I was a mentor, and I've watched this organization evolve to the place where it is today, which is phenomenal. But you think about the three nuances that started as nuances and are now primary characteristics of this great program that make it so unique. One is capital, right? 2 is mentorship, and 3 is education, all rolled into one ball. Where else can you get that?
Nope.
Right? And are there 3 more important elements in the formative years of a person's life to get at the level and the intensity that you get through this program?
Yep.
So I think as a country, we're in great shape, and I think programs like Next are able to accelerate and amplify that. And there's no country that I'd rather be in. As Joe and I have talked about a lot, I had the good fortune of having lots of options to live in other places and work in other places. And this is where I want to be because I really believe that the future is ours.
Yeah, I got to say, when you think about the average failure rate of a startup is about 80 to 85%. When, as Jordan says, we wrap all the academics, the profs from Harvard and MIT and Rotman and people like Reza who are out building businesses right now, but he inserts himself into a classroom setting because he's such a great educator. Ajay Agarwal, same thing. These guys are gifted educators, and you get the mentorship, and you get the network access to EY and Osler's. And I mean, I've been in some of these presentations, and my jaw dropped. Like it was so profoundly changed by the information and the sharing of the information and the way people were communicating. And to Jordan's point earlier, it's the interaction of all of you with one another, the new friendships that are being born, the partnerships and companies being founded. It's pretty freaking spectacular. I have to tell you, I just didn't have this when I was starting my companies, and I made so many mistakes. It was like I was tripping all over myself. A bit of a walking disaster. I mean, ultimately they seem to work out, but you make a lot more mistakes when you don't have all of these things. But there is another thing that I want to ask Jordan, and I struggle with this because we're in the home of a unicorn. We're in the home of something that is so incredibly successful locally, North America, and globally. But there's one. And, 25 years ago, there was Nortel. There was one until there wasn't. And then there was BlackBerry until there wasn't. And now there's Shopify, which I know is going to continue to exist. But we need 20 more of them. And my question is, how do we create more companies that are sustaining through the $100 million? There's an exit level, right? There's 50, 100, 500. How do we get those companies to sustain and become unicorns and become the next Shopify?
I don't know the answer. I have some thoughts, but I mean, that is, and we're not the only country, by the way, that struggles with this issue. I think a lot of times Canadians internalize these issues and they think, oh my God, we're the only people in the world that deal with this. But there are far more exceptions to the $1 billion rule than there are not. Meaning, sure, there are lots of unicorns in the US, and you could pick in China, Japan, UK, but those are very, very, very rare exceptions to a rule, which is it is hard to create $1 billion in value.
Yeah.
At the risk of sounding like a broken record or beating a dead horse, one of our biggest issues, Joe, and maybe our biggest issue in my estimation, and I'll use my alma mater as an example, when you go to Facebook or Instagram, and I brought John Tory down for a visit, and so I was able to marshal the Canadian expats on our campus just in California. That's not our big office in London, not the big office in Seattle, just in California. We had about 225 Canadians show up to say hello. Now, these aren't 225 average Canadians, Joe.
Yeah.
Right? These are 225 brilliant, motivated domain experts that have chosen, for a variety of reasons, to leave our country and start a life south. And if you think about what would need to be true in order to repatriate them to come north of the border, it is hard. So I think the principal challenge we have is how do we create work environments and other types of incentives so that they never leave in the first place?
Yeah. And different from the past. When I was lucky enough to have some time with a woman named Angela Strange, who I would argue is one of the most successful, most talented VCs in America, and at Andreessen Horowitz. What she said was, there was a time when we were trying to lure Canadian talent down here. If they wanted us to invest, we needed them on Sand Hill Road. Today, it's so mercenary. It's so aggressive. It's so expensive. It is this war for talent that we actually want to invest in companies in Canada and keep them in Canada, because we know you just keep graduating more and more and more incredible talent, and we want them to stay in Canada. So
yeah, and I think the good news for those of us that have seen and believe in efficient markets, like for a long time, the flow of capital in the sector was totally inefficient because it was very much geography and network based, meaning like I'm on Sand Hill Row, I need you to be in Menlo Park, or in Palo Alto so I could grab you, touch you, come to your board meeting. And I don't trust you if you're not from those locations. And that's why a disproportionate amount of capital flew there, because that was just easy. It was convenient, and that's the way things were done. Today, I believe the markets are way more efficient. There's way more transparency. There are way more global examples of companies that have exploded outside the valley. And therefore, capital is flowing to great ideas that are started by great people with big visions and the ability to execute against those visions regardless of where you are. And so I think that is a trend that's going to help us as long as we can keep and incent talent to stay here. And it is a bit of the horse or the cart, like what comes first. But boy, if we keep losing our great young people at the rate we are right now, it is going to be tough to take Shopify and then create 10 more of them.
And I think you're right. I think it's going to come down to fiscal policy, right? How do we make the right incentives to keep our best and brightest here instead of giving them an opportunity to go to Austin or Nashville or wherever?
I'll give you an interesting, and I'm sure for those of you that have been in the Valley or worked in the Valley, here is like a common refrain from the people who were born here, were educated here, and then decided to go down south. I miss my family. Quality of life down here, other than the weather, not as good as it was in Canada. It is a very homogenous way of thinking down here. Not a very progressive president. And generally, no, I mean, and it doesn't even matter what your political stripes are, right? You could be a Republican and have that same sentiment. I hear it all the time. And so you sort of say, like, well, what's keeping you down here? And what do they say? The economic opportunity. I want to work with really smart people. I want to work on huge problems, and I want to get paid well. And so those are our challenges, right? How do you get groups like this of 90 really smart, progressive people? How do you create challenges that have nothing to do with being the best fill in the blank in Canada, but solving something big globally? And how do we create economic incentives so that you say the quality of life plus what I'm making or potentially could make far outweigh anything I could get anywhere else?
I think that's it. I think, you know what? I kind of wish we had another hour, because I actually wanted to open up to all of you. I don't think we can. Can I do 2 questions? Oh, thank you.
Hey, Joe,
Okay.
We have time for 1 question.
One.
So I'll give everybody a chance to raise their hand. I'll pick the first person.
Ainsley says 2.
Okay, you right there.
We're going to stay for 2. I see two hands.
Thanks for coming here. My question was about culture.
So it was about
Culture?
yes.
And you talked about building a great culture that lasts, but is it ever possible that the culture you build for a smaller company doesn't remain as effective when it's larger?
Such a good question. If you're going to go home with any homework tonight, here's what I would love you to think about. People throw the word cultural around a lot, like they do entrepreneur. And I think everybody definitionally thinks about culture in a different way. And so let me share with you the way I think about culture, and then this might inform my answer a little bit. So I think culture definitionally is 2 things. One is how things get done in an organization and how people behave when their manager isn't looking. Right? So you just think about those 2 things. What is the way things get accomplished? And then how do people behave when their manager isn't looking? And so ideally what happens is those 2 very, very profound things don't change as you get bigger. But what happens as you get bigger is ideally you allow for subcultures to be created. And that could happen by team, it could happen by geography, and you need to embrace it because you don't want a bunch of homogenous automatons who are all sort of like, reading from the same song sheet. But what you want is to ensure that their values, right, are aligned and that you all believe in the mission. So where is this thing going, and what is my part and your part and Joe's part in getting there? The companies that don't allow subcultures, which is a bit of the command and control, my way or the highway, these are the only 2 things that matter, inevitably don't scale because you get a bunch of people saying like, I got no power, I got no say, I got no voice, I'm out of here. So the trick is, how do you keep the metaculture while also allowing subcultures to develop?
Okay, I think we can do one more. Please, Visha.
Hi, Jordan. Hi, Joe.
Hi.
So I had a question regarding your definition of entrepreneurship. I think there's a lot of talk and debate between, whether an entrepreneur is born or whether they learn certain skills that lead them to that path. My question for you is, if an entrepreneur is born, what are the qualities that you can demonstrate that lead you to success? And if you're someone who is not necessarily an entrepreneur, what can you do to get yourself there?
So I think the number one, I think entrepreneurship, the entrepreneurial mindset, separate and apart from what the person does, is what I focus on. So that idea of being creative, hard work, judicious, committed. The number one thing that I think all great entrepreneurial mindsets share is this idea of being insatiably curious. And what I want to do is really draw a line of delineation between what people say, which is you got to be passionate about something versus you got to be curious about something. There are a lot of things I'm passionate about that if I would have followed that path, like I would have been, I probably would have followed the Dead, listened to Pink Floyd, thought I'd be a professional hockey player, and drank a lot of beer. Like that, those were my passions early on. Like what I'm curious about is way different. And so the best people that I work with, the ones I admire the most, are on a path or on a mission to satiate a big curiosity. And so I'm always asking people in job interviews, just to give you a sense, I'm always asking them, what are you most curious about? And what have you done proactively to satiate that curiosity? So case in point, I had an amazing woman who I interviewed who was totally underqualified for a position. I asked her that question. She said, I became fascinated with origami. And because I was going out with a Japanese gentleman at the time, and I started messing around with paper birds. And before I knew it, I realized, hey, I loved it. And I wanted to figure out a way to become an origami master. So I worked, made enough money over the course of 6 months to go to Japan, live there for a year to learn origami. And that's sort of all I needed to hear. I didn't care about her GPA, where she graduated. Like that to me told me everything I need to know. And so curiosity, but for that, I think you're pretty average. And if you have it in spades, I think you can be exceptional. And nobody's born inherently curious, right? The world around you allows you to ask some pretty interesting questions and figure out industrious ways to go answer those questions. And if you're not that person today, I would highly encourage you to become that person. It's not that hard, right? Walk down the street, look around you and see a crane and ask yourself, how in the world did that crane elevate 30 stories to build this building, right? Then you can look at all the stoplights and say, how are all these stoplights coordinated? Why is it green every time, and traffic patterns. Then you look around and see all the stores and say, how does 60 sushi places in 1 mile radius, how do they all stay in business? Right? That. Those are they're trite questions, but that's the type of mindset that you need. I think, at least, in order to be. There's a great book, by the way, written by a woman named Carol Dweck. And for those of you that have read the book, it's all about mindset. It's about asking the types of questions that allow you to be curious and allow you to develop a pattern of thinking that will help you not only in life, but also help you in business.
I got to say, I knew having Jordan here was going to be good. This has exceeded my expectation. Thank you ever so much.
Total pleasure. And congratulations. My pleasure. But, and I think both Jacqueline and Dan alluded to it, as did Colleen. It is a huge accomplishment to be sitting in these seats. And so please take a moment and just close your eyes and say how proud and lucky you should feel and fortunate. But with good fortune also comes big responsibility, right? And you can't forget that. And so there are thousands of people around the country that would give a lot to be sitting in your seats today. And if you are lucky enough to get selected, you should think as much about what it is you're going to build to as much as to give as much thought as to what you're going to give back, because you'll be in a very unique position to give back in a variety of ways that most people won't be able to do. So that's my challenge, and good luck with it, and congrats.
Thanks for tuning into LaunchPod. We're so proud to be part of this community doing such great things to move our country forward, but our reach only goes as far as your support. So please download and subscribe to amplify the voices doing the hard work to advance Canada's entrepreneurial ecosystem.